The veteran Marc-Andre Fleury looking for his first win as a Chicago Blackhawks. Krug to the net. He scores! Torrey Krug, another chance. And that'll do it. And the Blues a 1-0 shutout victory. As the Blackhawks missed the playoffs last season. And off to their worst start in 21 years.
Whether you are a Blackhawks lover or a Blackhawks hater, without a doubt, the Chicago Blackhawks are one of the greatest, if not the greatest, dynasty in NHL history. And before you go, Rob, that was the dumbest take I have ever heard. Well, you're probably right. But my argument would be the NHL went into a full lockdown for 82 games in the 04-05 season. And what was the result? Yeah, that's right, the goddamn salary cap. And what does that mean? Instead of rich teams being able to outspend smaller markets, the salary cap was introduced to provide parity. Because teams were now forced to spend within a similar price range, as not only is there a salary cap, but there is a salary floor. Teams after the introduction of the salary cap would theoretically have more similar roster talent. Therefore, games would have to become more competitive, right? And yes, my god, they were right. Because to prove that there was a direct correlation after the salary cap was introduced, I thought it'd be interesting to look at goal differential, which is a stat line to capture how many goals a team scores versus how many they let in. And during the 80s and 90s, it was common to see NHL teams at the bottom with a negative 150 goal differential. As I painstakingly went back and tracked the bottom team's goal differential from the 80s all the way to present day. Because from 1980 until 1990, the bottom teams averaged around a negative 120 goal differential. In the 90s, they averaged a negative 134. Also keep in mind this fluctuation was definitely due to the introduction of the Sharks and Senators. But even if we look at the season before the salary cap was introduced, so the 03-04 season, the bottom team had a negative 113. So, what happened? Well, from 2010 until current day, the last place teams in the NHL averaged a negative 78 goal differential. Okay, so before 134. After, all right, so after we had after 78, and 134 is much bigger than 78. And also my argument to why the Blackhawks have one of the most impressive dynasties ever. Because before the salary cap, and don't get me wrong, I am not saying by any means it was easy to assemble a team and win a cup. However, what I am saying is after the NHL introduced the salary cap, games instantly became more competitive from top to bottom. And when teams in general are more competitive, the chances a team wins multiple Stanley Cups within a short time frame only speaks volume to how dominant that team was. Especially in hockey when there's so many random occurrences, and it's a game that relies so heavily on teamwork. Because from 2010 until 2015, the Blackhawks were objectively a dominant force of nature who took home an extremely impressive 3 Stanley Cups. And as a Canucks fan growing up, my god did I hate them. However, even though they had one of the most dominant stretches in NHL history, surprisingly, the Hawks pre-2007 were in a very rough place. In fact, they weren't even recognizable. Tickets were being sold for $5, if not just straight up given away. Because after having many dominant seasons and cup wins during the 90s and 80s, the Hawks from 1997 to 2008 entered the dark ages, as they would miss the playoffs 10 times in an 11-year span. So we're talking Buffalo Sabres territory, ladies and gentlemen. The New York freaking Times even wrote an article roasting the Blackhawks in 2007 for just being a poverty franchise, highlighting the fact that they had half-empty stands, which was a disgrace to Chicago sports. However, that was until
from the London Knights, the Ontario Hockey League, Patrick Kane.
The Chicago Blackhawks would land 2 slam dunk picks in 2006 and 2007, selecting Jonathan Toews 3rd overall and Patrick Kane 1st in 2007. And after Kane and Toews entered the lineup, on top of the emergence of players like Duncan Keith, Dustin Byfuglien, Patrick Sharp, Brent Seabrook, and honestly, the list can go on and on. The Blackhawks would go from being at the bottom of the league to being a competitive team in year 1 of the Kane and Toews saga. and then being a top team in the NHL in year 2. And they saw success even after Dale Talon's horrific, and I just mean horrific, paperwork blunder that literally almost costed them a cup. Because back in 2009, and I'm not even joking, Dale Talon would forget to send in his paperwork, which would have qualified 8 players including Chris Versteeg. And what does that mean? It led to the Hawks having to spend millions extra on unnecessary contracts. And I mean, if you look at the Canucks in some of these just bizarre cap situations, a move this dumb could have costed them all the cups they won because paperwork wasn't sent. And finally, in 2010, they would go all the way and take home the Stanley Cup, going from a poverty franchise to the best team in the NHL, the champions. However, all of the success has been pushed aside because of the actions of the human scum himself, Brad Aldridge. And I might as well say it alongside of those who knew and chose to do nothing about it. Because the Blackhawks during the next 5 years would go on to establishing themselves as a legitimate dynasty. As Patrick Kane would go on to being one of the best Americans the game has ever seen, Duncan Keith would establish himself as a top defenseman in NHL history, as he would take home 2 Norris trophies and a Conn Smythe. On top of having Taves as a shutdown player, and screw it, add Marian frickin' Hossa to the mix. And the result? Pure dominance. Yet, after the cup winning high of 2015, the Hawks started to stagnate. As all those amazing depth players that won you cups, yep, they all got massive bags elsewhere. So the question is, how do you fix this? Do you A, draft well and get back to championship level with patience? Option B, trade players and go into free agency determined with a game plan to win? Or option C, repeatedly make some of the dumbest trades I have ever seen. And which one is it? Let's go with option C. Trade your top young goalie for an AHL player? Check. Trade the equivalent of 2 first-round picks for a regressing Andrew Ladd. Trade Philip Deneau, a budding future Selke winner, and a second-round pick, which also ended up to be Alexander Romanov, for 2 fourth-line depth and rental players. Trade Teuvo Teravainen, a young and budding star, for a second and a third. And finally, and I'm sorry if this offends you, wait, actually I'm literally not at all, and I will fall on the sword on this one. But what has to be the most idiotic trade of them all was trading Artemi Panarin, the next Russian superstar. Patrick Kane himself said Artemi Panarin was the most skilled player he had ever played with, and he had the most fun he had ever had playing with Panarin. And after a Calder win and 2 dominant years of Patrick Kane and Panarin, what did the Hawks decide to do? Trade Panarin, fearing they couldn't sign him, even though they just signed him for 2 years and was arguably your best player? So let's trade that, a proven star, for a regressing Brandon Saad, who was only making slightly less than Panarin, and would go on to having a 35-point season. And so the question is, what did Panarin do? 90 points, if not just shy of 100 points every single season since he was traded. And finally, this past season, I don't know if it's worse than Panarin, maybe you tell me, but the Blackhawks would once again execute one of the dumbest trades I have ever seen, as they would acquire Seth Jones. Just to get out of the way here, I personally like Seth Jones, but for a 2021 8th overall pick, Adam Boqvist, the 8th overall pick in 2018, a 2021 second, and my god, a 2022 first, meaning the Chicago Blackhawks gave up 3 top 10 picks and a second rounder for the goddamn right to make Seth Jones the most overpaid defenseman in the league. Like, congratulations, I guess. You have officially hit the Oilers level of rock bottom, as the Blackhawks were shockingly willing to leverage their entire future for the chance of maybe making the playoffs, which in my opinion may just lead to the repeat of the early 2000s, aka the Dark Ages for the Hawks, which at this point is honestly a deserved form of karma from all the stinky garbage this organization has been pulling for the past decade. Because not only did the Chicago Blackhawks bet their future for this season, not only have they been a complete dumpster fire this season, but we would also see Kyle Beach come out and tell his story this season, resulting in the firing of many internal and external people, and an ongoing court process. Not to mention they would also have to fire their own current coach because the team was doing so badly, and I can't wrap my head around the fact that they thought winning was that important. I don't know, maybe there's another reality where you can address the problem, like the guy assaulting your own player and then still win, but maybe I'm just an optimist. as the Chicago Blackhawks went from a super team, a dynasty, to a goddamn disgrace.